Thank you for joining us today for Virtual Expo Showcase. Are you locking your front door and leaving your back window open? I'm Dawn Thomas, Executive Director of NACCU. Joining me today from Northland Controls is Danny Chung, Global Director of Consulting and Design, Rob Kay, Director of Professional Services, and Henry Hoyne, Chief Technology Officer. Gentlemen, it's great to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you.
Shall we go ahead and start?
Absolutely.
Perfect, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'd like to start by thank you for taking time out of your busy day to attend our presentation. Today we'll be presenting an educational segment that we're calling, Are You Locking the Doors but Leaving Your Windows Open? We're going to discuss at a high level the secure chain from credentials to securing and encrypting the data in transit and at rest. With that said, as Don had mentioned, my name is Henry Hoyne and I'm the CTO, and Danny Chung and Rob Kay will also be presenting segments as we go through this presentation. But before we jump right into the presentation, I'd like to start by giving you guys a brief overview of Northland. So essentially, we're security professionals that offer end-to-end services from consulting to design, program and project management, engineering, installation, and service. So it really is end-to-end. In addition to hanging readers and cameras, we also offer remote GSOC services through our managed services. And at the end of this presentation, we'll briefly discuss some additional services that are here to assist you with anything that we've covered today. And feel free to submit any questions in the chat window. We'll open it up for a Q&A at the end of the presentation. And now I'd like to turn it over to Danny, who will lead the discussions with secure credentials.
Thanks, Henry. Just wanted to start off today by talking about some of our secure credentials. When it comes to physical security credentials, legacy access control systems and legacy access control credentials leave a lot to be had, I think, in a security system. As you know, legacy systems have generally started from what we consider a magstripe type credential. It's moved its way onto, say, a prox type card, with both of those being a very unsecure option in this day and age. It's then moved on to, say, a more secure type of card, which iClass and MyFair Classic has captured. I think up to this point, those have all been compromised at this point. And so the next step of security credentials would be the CIOS or MyFair DesFire EV1 or EV2 platform. I do understand that there's quite a few NACCU members who've already made the move to a more secure credential, but just kind of wanted to cover on a few topics there. Some of this old credential technology like prox or magstripe readers become quite vulnerable. With a handheld unit just like this that you can purchase on Amazon for about $25 to $30, you can clone a prox card in under 20 seconds. And so just wanted to kind of talk to you about the credentials themselves. I just want to highlight the EV1 and the EV2 platform are typically what we see as more, I guess, a secure platform nowadays. The difference between the two is that the EV2 platform or EV2 credential gives you a little bit of a longer read range. I think between CIOS and EV2, they both use the AES 128 encryption. They both use the rolling key sets, which makes it highly dependable when it comes to security. As far as what's next, we consider this the front door of what we would think of as security. There's many things beyond that, so I'll go ahead and turn it over to Rob to go over the next slides to talk about how we can help secure the rest of our home or facilities.
Thank you, Danny. Really appreciate that. So as Danny mentioned there, I think traditionally when we think about securing our facilities, we often think about our card readers, we think about our credentials, and we think about the locks that we're putting on our doors. However, any modern access control system needs an entire IT infrastructure in order to operate. So when we refer to windows here, we're referring, of course, not just to the panes of glass that let light through so we can all see what we're doing, but also the operating systems that are probably running most of the access control systems that we're using in our facilities today. If you can just jump ahead to the next slide for me, Danny. Thank you. So we'd like to take a brief look today at an end-to-end encrypted solution and what this looks like in terms of encrypting data from when it's stored on the card, as Danny's recapped for us previously. As it goes through that communication chain, this information is passed from the reader to the door interface module, from the door interface module to the site controller or panel, then up across the network to our database servers and application servers, and then of course, how do we secure that data at rest? Without an end-to-end encrypted solution, we are not capturing all the attack vectors that are available for bad actors. Slide. Thanks, Danny. So hopefully OSDP, the acronym here, Open Supervised Device Protocol, should not come as a surprise or news to any of us. Work began on OSDP back in 2005. If you can just advance the next slide, please. OSDP has been written by the Security Industry Association, the SIA. The most recent version of this, version 2, includes OSDP v2 Secure Channel, which we'll mention a little bit about in a moment. This was a standard that was written in an attempt to solve one of the problems that's been inherent in our industry for a long time. Back in the 90s, many manufacturers started to use the vegan protocol for communication between a card reader and a door interface module. This was a de facto standard. It was never laid out by anybody, but it was taken on due to the fact that it offered interoperability between different manufacturers. OSDP, the Open Supervised Device Protocol, offers us many advantages over vegan. The first of these is that it's a bi-directional protocol. It works off the RS-485 protocol. Historically, with our vegan readers, we can only send information in one direction. So we can transmit credential information from our card reader to our door interface module, which can then make a decision on whether or not we allow access. And that was the limitation. That was the only information that we could send, and we could only send it in one direction. With OSDP, we can send information in two directions, and we can also send the information as data packets as opposed to just ones and zeros on the line. This means that we can now send information back down to the reader, such as LED control or buzzer control, simple operations that used to be taken care of with additional wires. We can also send information such as LCD messages, where we can greet people as they enter the facility or present different messages on a screen depending upon the credential that they presented. Perhaps more excitingly, for those of us that have budgets that we need to control, this now gives us the ability or the option to send additional information such as firmware updates or configuration changes down the wire to the reader. This becomes very important when we are utilizing those secure credentials and the secure readers that we mentioned earlier. Any secure credential involves a key set, and a key set is used to establish secure communication between a credential and a reader. What happens if these key sets get compromised? Many of these readers enable a rolling function. However, we need to trigger the reader to do so. The ability to send that trigger down the wire from the controller and the software means that we no longer need to roll techs out in trucks. We no longer need to send people to site in order to make configuration changes to these readers. One of the second great benefits of the OSDP protocol, as I said, because now we can send data packets, we can get status updates from those readers. So they can notify us if they're offline. That helps us to proactively preempt service calls and know when people are not going to be able to enter a facility. Perhaps more importantly, it also allows us to manage the tamper state of these readers. It lets us know if somebody has interfered with one of these readers or removed it from the wall, and we'll see in a coming slide why that might be very important to us. One of the big drivers for OSDP adoption is that ability to give us that V2 secure channel. So we can now encrypt data in AES 128 bits between our reader and our door interface module. Once again, it's not immediately obvious to all why this is important. Why do I need to encrypt the wire that runs from my reader to my door interface module? And we'll attempt to answer that question in just a moment on the next slide. Fourthly, these readers are arguably easier to install. They only require 4 cores for operation, as opposed to additionally 6 or 8 cores from older vegan style readers. The lighter weight cable means it comes cheaper. We can fit more of it on trucks, and therefore, hopefully, it means the technicians that are carrying out those installations for you can be more productive. And finally, it achieves that interoperability that was the driver for adopting the vegan standard in the first place. So it now gives you as end users the opportunity to choose the devices that best suit your business and your requirements. You can go to market for the most suitable card readers. You can select the biometric devices that are most suited to your needs, as opposed to being locked into any one particular manufacturer. Slide please, Danny. Thank you. So what I'd like to do here is just give a very quick example of why this might be important. So the device that you can see on the right-hand side of the screen here is a device called a BLE key, BLE referring to Bluetooth Low Energy. This is a device that is readily available online. In this instance here, this screenshot is from hackerwarehouse.com. Now it should worry all of you that this says it's out of stock. This means that these are now prevalent in the hands of bad actors. This device is a very small device. It's powered by a coin cell battery. It will last up to 2 years running off that coin cell battery. If I can install this device onto the wire that runs from the card reader to the door interface module, this will transmit all of that vegan data to my mobile phone over Bluetooth. This means as long as I'm within Bluetooth range, I can record all of the information that's being transmitted. So I can then go away from there and produce duplicate credentials that would allow me access into the facility. I can make life easy for myself and carry out a replay attack, which means I'll just mirror some of the data that was previously recorded and send that credential information back down the wire. This would authenticate my entry as another authenticated user. Or finally, once I have access to the facility, I could choose to just send jargon down. This will just send random strings of 1s and 0s and make that reader completely unoperable. Now, in terms of how somebody would get this onto the wire, this is a demonstration that I'd like to show you, and this video is courtesy of Eric Evanchek. But this is what it takes in order to get one of these onto a reader. So if you could go ahead and just hit play on that for me, Danny. Thank you. So this is the one of the HID Thinline 2 readers, probably recognizable to many of you. Hugely popular reader for years now. Hundreds of thousands of these installed out there in the wild, should we say. So the technician here, or the bad actor, has removed the front of the reader. In his left hand here, you'll see that BLE key device that we mentioned earlier. He's using a chromium tool here, which is a popular networking tool. This allows him to make the connections via a punch down. So he's punching onto the 2 data wires here, and he's also going to punch onto the ground wire. As soon as he's made those connections and he's punched down onto them, this device is now live and will start capturing all of the data on this reader. Now, historically, with a reader like this, if we were going to monitor the tamper, if we wanted to know if somebody had removed this, that would require an additional 2 cores to be run out to this reader, and they would then have to be terminated onto our access control system. So in less than 60 seconds, this bad actor has managed to install one of these devices on the perimeter of your facility. We're seeing an example here of a replay attack. He's just going to repeat the card sequence that he captured earlier. That device will now transmit it down the wire. That will be received as within our access control system as a granted access, and that door will open and allow him access to the facility. Scarily, from an audit and logs perspective, nothing's going to show in there other than a granted access for an existing user. So unless we're confident that we know the status of our readers 24/7, and we can guarantee that nobody's going to have access to those for 60 seconds, I would strongly suggest people take a view to adopting OSDP v2 secure channel, which gives us both that monitoring and encryption perspective. If I was to manage to get one of these devices onto an OSDP encrypted line, it would serve me no purpose. That information is hash encrypted, which means it changes every time, meaning I cannot do a replay attack. Finally, well, I do understand that in order to utilize OSDP v2 protocols, it means that our existing door interface modules will need to support that. Now, you'll need to check with your current integrator or VAR whether the version of the hardware that you have in your system, the version of the firmware and the software does support this. If it doesn't, there is some good news. There are devices out there on the marketplace, readily available, fairly cheap devices that will translate data between OSDP and between vegan. So if that is an option that you're interested in, we would strongly advise changing out your readers for OSDP v2 readers and installing one of these translation devices within the secure part of your system. So installing this in the door interface module or within the access control panel, as opposed to installing the OSDP conversion at the panel end. That means that you get all the benefit of the encrypted data, although unfortunately at this stage, none of the benefit of the monitoring. If you just slide there for me, Danny. Thank you. Okay, so we're progressing towards our end-to-end encrypted system. We have a secure encryption from our credential to our reader, and now from our reader to our door interface module. That door interface module needs to send information and data back to our site controller or back to our panel. In the vast majority of access control systems out there, this is achieved via an RS-485 communication protocol. Once again, these are wires that are buried within risers within our buildings, within cable trays. Once they've been installed, most of us forget they're there. However, if a bad actor were to gain access to that wire, it's incredibly easy to tap onto that. The RS-485 is a very well-known protocol, and this would allow me to then to carry out one of these man-in-the-middle attacks or replay attacks on the data being exchanged between my door interface module and between my site controller or panel. Now, unfortunately, there is no current industry standard when it comes to encrypting this data. However, the vast majority of modern access control systems have solved this problem, and they do offer encryption on the 485 line. The methodology for enabling this differs by system, but normally this means a tech to access both the door interface modules and the intelligent site controller or the panel and change dip switch settings to enable that. So it is something that needs to be planned. It will normally result in some downtime of that door, and that downtime can range from a minute to an hour depending on the system. But we would strongly recommend, in order to achieve the end-to-end encryption, that this is a part of that chain that's taken into consideration. Thanks, Danny. Okay, so assuming now that we have a secure encrypted connection from our credential to our card reader, from our card reader to our door interface module, and from our door interface module to our site controller or panel, now we face probably the second biggest attack vector. So if the largest attack vector is your credentials, given the user base that have them, and the fact that you cannot control where they go, the second largest is probably your network. The data that is sent from your intelligent site controller to your application servers or database servers is imperative that it is encrypted. If you could jump to the next slide here, Danny. Now, obviously, in order for me to gain access to those RS-485 wires, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to need to get into one of the risers. I'm going to need to perhaps get into one of the cable trays. In order to access your network, generally all I need to do is walk around one of the facilities with my laptop or other device and carry a patch cable that most of us have in our bags at any one time. So gaining access to those networks is significantly easier. That's why we would strongly recommend that any data that is transmitted from by your access control system is encrypted using TLS. TLS, standing for Transport Layer Security, is the latest iteration of SSL, or Secure Socket Layer Encryption. And then if you can jump to the next slide here, please. Thank you. So TLS offers 3 levels of protection. Firstly, it offers encryption. So it uses a cipher suite to encrypt the data that's being sent. It does use hashing on that to ensure that no replay attacks can take place. Secondly, it offers authentication. So a TLS handshake takes place. Generally speaking, this is a request from a client to a server in terms of identification. So there is an authentication that takes place via a handshake before any data is sent. And finally, it offers integrity. So it uses MAC or MAC in order to ensure that the data that was sent is the data that is received, using checksums and hashes to ensure that that's correct. Once again, all systems differ in terms of how this will be enabled. Nearly all modern access control systems do offer this feature. Unfortunately, even given the nature of the industry that we work in, most of the systems will not use any of this encryption by default. So we would strongly recommend reach out to your VAR, reach out to your integrator, and work with your IT team to ensure that at least TLS version 1.2 is being used to encrypt data between panels, controllers, and servers and client stations. Slide for me there, Danny. Thanks, and then slide again. Okay, so now we have a fully secure communication path. So I know that when I approach one of my readers, the data on my credential is secure. I can transmit that securely across the air to my reader. That reader is going to encrypt that data using OSDP version 2 and send it to my door interface module. My door interface module is going to make the decision on whether or not I'm allowed access. It's going to then send that event data and that log data back to my access control panel down an encrypted 485 line. That access control panel or site controller will then send that log information back to my server or my client machines over a TLS 1.2 encrypted network. However, what access control system would be complete without those logs or logs, events, and journals? We all want to know what's happened in the past, and in order to do that, that requires storing data. Thanks, Danny. So every access control system out there requires a database, and the database is what stores that information and enables us to run those historic logs and traces. Once again, given the path of our industry and the journey that it's taken, to my knowledge, none of those systems, unless they've been installed within the last 18 months or so, will use secure databases by default. So when it comes to encrypting databases, we often find that some fields within databases, such as passwords or PIN numbers, will already be hashed. However, that database does contain PII. For those of you that are international, this exposes us to GDPR regulations. It also contains our credential information, which could, in the hands of bad actors, allow access to our facilities. Slide there, please, Danny. So what options do we have when it comes to encrypting the data at rest on our servers? The first and preferable option is full disk encryption. Now, most of us have probably encountered full disk encryption on our on our laptop devices or desktops. Full disk encryption requires that credentials are provided to the BIOS or to the hard drive before the operating system is launched. There are many different manufacturers out there, but if you turn on your device and before your Windows or Mac OS operating system launches, you're prompted for a username and password. It's normally on a screen that looks like it's straight from the 80s. There's no processing power at this stage to support nice graphics. Therefore, it's a somewhat dated screen, but that's an example of full disk encryption. The challenge with full disk encryption is we need to provide those credentials to the bare metal servers. So we're trying to provide those before we launch into an operating system. This does create challenges if we have virtualized the servers that we use and the client's workstations that we use on our access control systems, but options that do exist out there in order to provide full disk encryption for virtual machines. So this would be the first go-to that we would advise people to try and roll out. If you just go back one more for us, Danny. Thank you very much. The second option that's available to us is file system encryption. So any modern operating system will work off multiple file systems, and we can choose to encrypt different separate or individual file systems within a hard drive or within a storage array. So generally this means that we're providing that credential information through our operating system or via our operating system. So where those machines are remote or where they're virtualized, this offers a good option to us to protect the information in our database, but to also protect other supporting files and ensure that they are encrypted. So if anybody does manage to remove those servers or to remove those hard drives, the information on there will be unavailable to them. And then the third and final option available to us here is database encryption. And as the name suggests, this does only encrypt data in the database. So all of those supporting files and folders that you have on those servers would not be encrypted. However, both the Microsoft SQL database and Oracle databases do offer transparent data encryption, or TDE as it's widely known. As the name would suggest, this encryption is transparent to the applications that are trying to access it. Therefore, regardless of the system, the access control system that you utilize, so long as you have a supported version of the Microsoft SQL or Oracle databases, you will be able to deploy TDE on those. Generally speaking, deploying TDE to a production database, a database that's in use, is challenging. So we would recommend that this is deployed at the time of an upgrade or at the time of a migration when we're going to a new database, as encrypting a database that's already in use as production is incredibly challenging. Thanks, Danny. Okay, and then finally, I think this is one that escapes many people, but we need to give some consideration to where else do we have data at rest? Where else do we have sensitive information that could potentially wind its way up in the hands of bad actors? So one of the obvious ones here would be those panels or those site controllers that we have in our facilities. They contain offline versions of our database that hold credential information on everybody that has access to the facilities. Some of them will contain PII in terms of first name, last name, things like that. A lot of modern access control systems do allow that data to be encrypted whilst at rest on those panels. However, more often than not, if these devices do fail, they end up in the back of a tech's truck. Sometimes they can remain there for 6 months. They get taken back to somebody's office, stripped down for spares. All of your sensitive information, all of your data still exists on that device. So be very, very careful about allowing any panels or any devices you have that contain a database to leave your facility. The next one, being access control readers. As I say, a few years back, they used to be dumb aerials, but they're absolutely not dumb aerials anymore. They have encryption keys in them. They have data sets in them that if they wind up in the hands of bad actors can expose us, can leave us much more liable to attack. So again, please give some consideration to what happens to your readers when they fail, what happens to readers that you've ordered that didn't get installed. Are you still in possession of those? Or have they been removed from your site and you've now lost control of the key sets and the data that's on those? The third one we would recommend is biometric devices as well. Biometric devices such as iris scanners, fingerprint readers, or facial recognition devices almost always contain some kind of data. In this instance, it may well not just be PII data, but it could be SPII if it contains biometric data. Once again, please don't allow these devices to leave your facility or leave your network without knowing what's going to happen to them. And then finally here, we would recommend anything that has a log. This could be CCTV cameras, IP cameras, any other device that contains logs may well have usernames or other sensitive information in them. So we would encourage you to work with your IT teams and your IT departments, establish how they destroy devices with potentially sensitive data on them, and treat the devices in your access control systems within your video surveillance systems as devices that contain data as sensitive as the laptops that you carry around with you. Thanks, Danny. Okay, at this time, I'd like to hand over to Henry Hoyne, our CTO, with just some best practice advice.
Great, thank you, Rob. So by now, you've heard Danny and Rob cover securing the channel from card to reader, reader to panel, and panel to database. However, simply doing that is not going to be enough. So I'd like to go over some additional areas to consider. Next slide, Danny. So knowing and managing your networks, I mean, the first step is to document everything, know what's out there, how they communicate with one another. And please don't get yourself into a situation where you have a legacy device, maybe one that's running Windows XP, which can be easily compromised. And I know that sounds really legacy, early 2000s, but there are some systems or some clients that have had a server running in a closet that people forgot about, and it does happen from time to time. So, in addition to that, personnel will come and go, and you may have someone that's been on staff 15, 20 years. But if it's not documented, that inherent knowledge is going to leave with that person. So I know this sounds like common sense, but we have walked into situations where we had to follow the breadcrumbs to assist the client in front of documenting everything. And please do ensure that documentation is kept up to date. Next slide. Segmenting networks. So this is important for a number of reasons. One, you do not want to be on the same network as the general public. And when I say public, what I'm referring to is not necessarily those outside of the organization, but that could be your employees and your guest. A few of our clients have said that their biggest threat is not external, but it's internal. You may have students with computer science majors who are always looking at ways to exploit their newfound skills. Or if your team is big enough, you may have a red team, which is oftentimes separate from your traditional IT group. And they're always looking at ways to reach your systems. That's their job. And you'll also want to segment production from dev systems and sandboxes. Sometimes those systems are exact mirrors, in a way that they're configured and hopefully not server name, but everything else within could be a mirror of your production system. And you don't want to get into a situation there as well to where you're either making changes or a test, and now it's communicating and interfering with production. So please do segment it, create VLANs, or physically separate it from, if you need to go so far as air gapping, which is pretty rare, but it does happen in some instances, that is one option. Next slide. As far as firewalls, traditionally they manage traffic that's inbound and outbound. They come in either hardware or software form. A hardened system can go so far as locking down unused communication ports. I would recommend holding meetings with your IT team and your security vendor to discuss all of your applications and how they communicate with one another. We have seen instances where IT has locked down ports without these conversations, and it could wreak havoc on on your system at the end of the day, especially with some of the erratic behaviors that we have seen, and that's just going to lead to extensive troubleshooting. But when it comes to firewalls, I mean, their role is simply not to protect the external from the internal. I mean, there are cases where you would want a firewall behind a firewall to implement further protection. Next slide. As far as network monitoring, there's a number of layers, so I'm just going to touch on a couple. But you need to know what normal network traffic looks like versus something that's anomalous. An increase in traffic can indicate either a malfunctioning device or a security breach or similar. This ties back to documenting your network, and ensuring that data isn't going someplace that it shouldn't. There's lots of tools out there that can help with network logging, and network logging typically is a flat file that's written within the applications, or it's generated by the applications, and there's a lot of data that's there, and it's a lot to comb through. But there are apps that can take that data and parse through and present only what's relevant or needed. Next slide. Intrusion detection systems. These are oftentimes systems that are designed to detect and in some cases prevent an intrusion. Much like network monitoring, this can be a device or an application that monitors a network or system for malicious activity or policy violations. You can oftentimes set up rules that if either were to occur, that it could contain the threat and seize traffic. So there's pros and cons to it, but please ensure that you understand, how the policies are created, just so that you don't run into a situation that's going to cause, further headaches and troubleshooting. Next slide. Admin rights. I mean, this one sounds a bit obvious, but please do document who has access to your systems, and create a matrix with definitions of what those rights are. And I would say to audit this often, especially with a turnover in a staff, because you need to know who has access, not just to your security applications, but also to the networks that host these systems. And this can go so far as a server, operating system, database, and the applications. I would say far too often we've seen systems across the board with individuals or test accounts that have been long forgotten about. So please go through and audit and purge those that shouldn't be there any further. Next slide. Remote access. So know who has access if there are restrictions to that access. So you want to know the who, what, where, when, and why. You want to know who's accessing your systems at any given time, what they're doing, where they're accessing it from. And, and I say that that's important because a company like Northland, we have a global footprint, and it's not unheard of for someone in Rod's team who may be sitting in Asia Pac or EMEA to log into a system in any other regions. Now, for you, that might be cause for concern, especially if they're trying to access it in the middle of the night. And the last thing you would want is for someone to be in your systems without your knowledge. So, I would say to have that fully documented and try to implement two-factor when possible. There's a lot of systems. Well, I won't say a lot of systems. There are systems that offer two-factor when I'm talking about security systems. And then there are others that you can implement two-factor on top of that. But I would say wherever possible, try to implement two-factor and not just rely on a single sign-in credential. Next slide. When it comes to encryption, a lot of this is what Rob had just talked about, but this should be mandatory and not optional. You don't want a sniffer on your networks to capture some of that traffic data because we have seen systems, believe it or not, that have passed credentials in the clear. And some of that information can be manipulated and replayed or even altered. And like Rob mentioned that, whether your device is stolen or you have an e-waste program in place, you want to make sure that data is completely wiped out. And in the event that it's not, just make sure that it's encrypted. Next slide. So now I'd like to take the time to cover some additional services that we offer in case you need assistance in your journey towards securing your security ecosystem. And I'd like to turn it over to Danny to kick us off with that.
Thanks again, Henry. So that was quite a bit of information. Thanks, Henry and Rob, for presenting that. So what do we do with this information? So one of Northland's departments is the consulting department, which I head up. But in ways that we can help you, we can take this and say you don't know exactly what you have, you don't know what kind of credentials you're using, you don't know what kind of reader protocols you guys are using as far as encryption, we can definitely help with that. Starting from audits, security gap analyses, we can take a deep dive into your system, take a look and see what you have, and then provide recommendations on next steps and where to move forward. With that, we can also help with security master planning. So your security, department and roadmap, we can help map that out for you, whether that is 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. We can help plan moving from, say, a less secure credential to a CIOS or EV2 credential type. We can also help plan in deployment and help project manage that as well. And the last thing we do is create standards for you. The biggest thing is a lot of people or a lot of departments or people working in these departments have this information stuck in their head. But when they leave, that information leaves with them. So what we do is help put that on paper. And so that, regardless of in any situation, if any accidents were happen or if you have turnover in your department, none of that information leaves the department. And you can continue to move, smoothly in your program. Next, I'd like to pass it over to Rob with professional services to talk about some of his service offerings in his group.
Thanks, Danny. Within the professional services team at Northland Controls, we're really trying to tackle the skills gap within our industry. The rate of change of technology within our industry far outstrips probably even the IT industry, and it's very, very easy to get left behind and end up with more questions than answers. And that's where we try and bring the correct expertise to help turn those questions into answers. We offer 3 main disciplines of engineering within our professional services team. The first one, our technical engineering team, are there very much to get your systems, and when I say systems here, I'm not referring to the card readers and locks, but I'm referring to the servers and infrastructure that's required to run them into the best possible shape. And we do that via helping you to design and deploy them, harden existing systems, so go through an end-to-end encryption program that we've just spoken about today. Unfortunately, sometimes that does mean migrating onto new systems if the legacy systems that you're on just do not meet the needs of the business. And then certainly carrying out any integrations into student services or any other systems that contain information that you need to get up. Once we have that system where it needs to be and absolute peak performance, our performance engineering team come in there to keep it there. So they offer remote maintenance services that are required. Many of us spend money on cleaning our cameras and adjusting our locks. However, we forget that applying patches to our operating systems and keeping our firmware up to date is just as important when it comes to eliminating vulnerabilities. And our performance engineering team can absolutely help you there. And then finally, our integration engineering team comes in once we have a great system and we can keep it in good shape. Now we need to add devices to it so that it is actually a useful system, and that's where our integration engineering team come in, and they offer kind of device configuration, commissioning, and system validation. So if you'd like a second set of eyes on any installation that's taken place, or you'd like someone to come in and confirm the works that have taken place and ensure that they are both up to your standards and best practice, our integration engineering team are more than happy to do so. And I'll finally hand over to Henry to talk about the lab.
Great, thank you, Rob. Yeah, so the intent of the labs is to offer goods and services to the greater market, not just necessarily any client that we're doing work with today. And our approach is to take an objective point of view with every project. And what we would like is for you to come to us with your problem statement and allow us to provide a solution for you. And there's really three ways that we go about accomplishing that. One is product development, and the intent isn't necessarily to build a product up from the ground up. The intent is that if part of this solution finding is that there is a product that's there that's maybe 80% of what you're looking for off the shelf, that we can leverage the API or the SDKs and work with the manufacturer to give you that 100% turnkey solution. And then with R&D, that's not research and development, that's research and design. So when we're looking for any one product, we're not just going to look at products that we're authorized to sell as a dealer. We're actually going to scour the web and the industry to see all of the products that were out there. So a good example is when a client had a need for facial recognition. We initially started with 50 different manufacturers and narrowed that down. One of the more difficult questions for us to answer is what is the best of in any category, because that would be a subjective point of view. So really when we sit with you, there's about an hour interview process in really understanding what your needs are, what your gaps are, why you're trying to fill it, and really vet the opportunity. And then come back with viable solutions. But part of that is a full-on engagement during that entire process. So, using the facial recognition example, we wouldn't start with 50 and then come back with one. We would go from 50 present to the client, narrow that down to, maybe 25, and then go down further and further till we get to about 4. And as part of vetting those solutions, I would say the average reports are in the neighborhood of 350 to 400 pages. I mean, it is very thorough. It starts with an executive summary, but there's also lots of screenshots so that you can understand how we came up with the results, and you can replicate that in-house by following that playbook. And then lastly is custom solutions. Oftentimes, we've looked at how much we've spent with some of these manufacturers just for their in-house custom solutions, and oftentimes it's too expensive or it's too far out where it takes 6 to 8 weeks. So there's no reason why we couldn't bring those services in-house. Now, that's not to say that we're going to strip that from manufacturers, but we're here to serve the client at the end of the day and what's in their best interest. And I can tell you that right now, we are working with a VMS manufacturer and creating a certified integration with one of their, well, not theirs, but with the access control system for one of our clients. Next slide. Okay, so we've covered quite a bit. So now I'd like to open up to any questions that might have come in during that time.
Thanks, Henry. We would strongly encourage you to unmute and ask your questions. The more interactive we can be, the more collaborative we can be, I think the better for everyone. Whilst we will struggle for our mute buttons and cough and clear our throats, we do have a question in here from Cheryl. Thank you, Cheryl. Question based on pricing. If I'm perfectly honest, I think that we're a group of geeks that just want to do the right thing. When it comes to pricing, we have some various different models that we can kind of put to you. Generally speaking, what we'll do is we'll sit down, engage in conversations to really understand what your true needs are. We often find that the initial engagement is really just scratching the surface of what needs to happen, and then we'll work with you to design the service that is going to best suit your budget. Obviously, with unlimited funds, we can turn any system into a brand new, sparkling and fantastic out-of-the-box system. But we'll work with you to build a roadmap over 2 weeks to 6 years to see what that looks like. Next question here is: are we saying MagStrike proximity cards are totally vulnerable? If so, what do you recommend? Danny, do you want to take the first response to that?
Yeah, absolutely. They are, just due to the low frequency nature and the fact that the credentials on the cards themselves are not encrypted. They can be picked up via a long range reader or one of those devices like I've shared, or even what the BLE key that Rob has shown. I would say that that would be a good start. Obviously, we'd need to know a little bit more information about it. I think it's a good idea to get a big picture of what your system as a whole looks like, to be able to tackle, I guess, the next steps. We're not completely sure, you know, it's kind of like an open-ended question. You don't know exactly what you're getting into until you take a deep dive into it and figure out exactly what you have. So we're happy to help where we can. If Henry or Rob would like to add anything there, feel free.
Yeah, I will jump in actually, because there's a great irony at play here in terms of magstripe being the older technology is perhaps inherently slightly more secure than proximity. In order for me to clone a magstripe credential, I need to physically get my hands on that and run it through a magstripe reader, at which point the data is in plain text and I can easily copy it. However, with the proximity credentials that were popular from the mid-90s up until almost present day, they are an over-the-air transmission, so it's a wireless transmission, and that wireless transmission is in plain text. There is zero encryption on that. So I think everybody's heard the horror stories of people on subways and underground systems trying to clone people's credit cards, or the read range on these access control cards can be anywhere up to 12 to 15 inches. And as long as I can get within 12 to 15 inches of your card, I can very easily harvest the information and the credentials on that, create a duplicate, and enter your facilities using those. A couple more questions coming in. So just to follow up to that one first, that I'll lead with. We're on the Transact platform, and we'd like to know if the system would interface with that. The Transact platform is not a platform I'm familiar with. Danny or Henry, I'm not sure if it's one that you know of.
No, but I want to be clear that we're not here representing any one system. I mean, we're talking about an entire ecosystem. So whether it's the cards, it's the readers, or the encryption, I'm sure any one of those can interact with the platform that you're talking about, Blackboard. I think that is one that's, yeah, go ahead, Dan.
What we can do is take a look. You know, our consulting department does quite a bit of extensive research on a lot of different platforms and subjects. So feel free to reach out. We can take a look and see what's compatible there and what steps need to take place in order to move forward.
Yeah, I would say to feel free to reach out to us. We have our information on the screen there, and we don't charge to have conversations. Conversations are free of charge.
Yeah, I would say just very loosely, there's two technologies that Danny mentioned in terms of secure credentialing. One is the DESFi EV range, and that's DESFi EV1 and DESFi EV2. That's based on an NXP chip, and that is an open source protocol. So that one is freely open to the market. It's one in which you manage the encryption keys yourself. You're responsible for generating them, storing them, and keeping them secure. That obviously offers a lot of flexibility to interface with systems across the board. The second one that Danny mentioned, the CEOS platform, is a proprietary system of HID. The great news with that is they manage all of those keys and all that encryption process for you. The downside is that is a proprietary protocol, so only available on HID devices. A message here from Melinda. Sounds like you're some way through this process already. That's great to hear. Always good to hear when people have started this journey. It's rarely a quick journey, but every journey starts with the first step. If you're willing to share any of that experience, we'd love to hear it. Any challenges you ran into? Halfway, COVID has slowed you down. I understand.
Are there any other questions that folks have right now, since we have Rob, Danny, and Henry on this presentation?
Yeah, Don, I have a question. I mean, you guys have been talking about great stuff with technology, protecting servers, protecting data, protecting databases. But one of the biggest problems that we have is protecting everything from the users who have those credentials. Do you have recommendations for, or do you have data analytics to see when somebody is sharing credentials? And, you know, because that's really where we see compromises in our system.
Yeah, sure. I just want to clarify that before we jump into an answer. When you say sharing credentials, do you mean sharing a physical credential to access a facility or sharing a login credential to a system?
Yes.
Good answer.
We all have some similar problems. One of them, tailgating is a very big problem that every university tends to have.
Mm-hmm.
Long range reads maybe could help with that. If you'd be able to read that second person who was coming in to see if they had a credential. I mean, that's something there. But more, we have students who share cards. They share their credentials with each other, and that certainly causes some problems for some.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a couple of, and there's no easy answer. If there was an easy answer, I'd be a rich man, because I'd be selling it. I mean, certainly, the industry answer is 2FA or biometrics. So a credential is obviously something that you have, and something that I have can be passed to somebody else. Something like a PIN number or a password is something that I know, and that's something I can tell somebody else. A biometric is something that I am. So whether that's my fingerprint, whether that's my face, whether it's my iris, where we have secure applications that we need to ensure the person that's being identified is also being authenticated. Biometrics or two-factor is an option. There is an emerging trend for, and it's early at the moment, but we are seeing some systems starting to use the mobile phone for 2FA. So this isn't the use of a mobile phone as a credential, which is obviously gaining a lot of popularity. I would imagine most students would be more reluctant to hand their phone to somebody than they would their plastic card. But this is more using the phone as an additional layer, as a second form of authentication. So I would first present my badge to the reader, and then I would receive some kind of pop-up or notification on my phone to accept the fact that, yes, this is me, and this is me trying to access this facility at this time. So no easy answers for you there, Richard, but generally using multi-factor or biometrics is the easiest one.
Yeah, there is a system that I'm aware of, and I made it. Made a self-promise I wouldn't name drop any manufacturers here, but feel free to reach out. But this does go in line with the reader wire. So as you show your badge, it'll intercept that card, a card number, and you would have to authenticate that with your phone before it passes it through. And like Rob had said, I mean, it's pretty rare that folks are going to loan out a badge, much less, well, not a badge, but there are phones at the same time. So it could be a form of 2FA.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
In terms of strategies for stopping tailgating, we've seen hundreds. We've tried tens. There are very few that we'd recommend with high accuracy. But I think it's fair to say there's no one size fits all. It very much depends on the portal or the point that you're trying to prevent tailgating on.
Yeah, I don't know of any manufacturer that would put their name on the line and say that they can prevent 100% tailgating. There was always the older analog systems that would use beams and lasers. Nowadays, you're seeing a lot of it done with video analytics, and they are getting smarter. They're starting to leverage AI in the background, but still a lot of those systems aren't perfect, and they're a little tricky to set up, especially when you're using cameras at a doorway for obvious reasons with the lighting and the angles.
There's also a few reader manufacturers that claim that they can detect tailgating based on read range and walking through a portal or a door as well. So there are a lot of claims out there. Obviously, we'd be happy to take a look into if there's any specific ones that you're looking at, we can definitely take a look at it. But there are a lot of claims out there, not necessarily any that we think that are 100% safe.
We are nearing the bottom of the hour. Are there any final questions for our presenters today?
And there might be some shy folks on the line. I mean, I would encourage them to reach out to us via email if possible.
Absolutely. we will share this presentation out with everybody again, so they will have access to that information if they don't write it down now. Let's see, no other questions in the chat. I just would like to thank you all for presenting to us today. Very informative and new things that I learn every time when we go through this. Thank you so much for sharing. Thanks to our viewers for your attention and for asking some great questions of our presenters. Our next schedule for virtual events is posted online. You can check out the website at naccu.org. Special thanks to our presenters today, Danny Chung, Rob Kay, and Henry Hoyne of Northland Controls. Thank you very much.
Yeah, have a great day, folks.
I'm Dawn Thomas with NACCU. Enjoy your day.